Navigating the world of healthy eating, especially when managing blood sugar, can often feel like a complex puzzle. While vegetables are universally lauded for their health benefits, it's really crucial to understand that not all are created equal when it comes to their impact on glucose levels. It's surprising, but some popular choices can actually cause an unwelcome spike, particularly for individuals with diabetes or insulin resistance. Top 6 seemingly healthy vegetables that spike blood sugar. Number 1, sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes often wear that proud badge of superfood, don't they? They're celebrated for their rich array of vitamins, minerals, and fiber, and you'll often find they're recommended as a healthier alternative to other starchy vegetables. And in many situations, that's absolutely right. However, when we start talking about blood sugar management, their profile becomes a little bit more nuanced. You see, sweet potatoes have a glycemic index, or GI, that typically hovers around 70. Now, this can vary based on the specific type and, importantly, how you cook them. A GI of 70 is generally considered to be in the medium to high range, which means they can raise your blood sugar levels more quickly than foods with a lower GI. Now, to get an even fuller picture beyond just the GI, it's also really helpful to consider something called the glycemic load, or GL. The GL takes into account both the quality, that's the GI, and the quantity of carbohydrates in a typical serving. So, while a small portion of sweet potato might have a moderate GL, larger servings can significantly bump up this value, leading to a more substantial blood sugar response. And speaking of preparation, the way you prepare your sweet potatoes plays such a pivotal role in their glycemic impact. Baking or roasting, for instance, can actually concentrate the sugars and might even increase that GI value. These methods often give you that lovely fluffy texture, but that can also mean quicker digestion and glucose absorption. On the other hand, boiling sweet potatoes tends to result in a somewhat lower GI when you compare it to baking or roasting. The moisture involved in boiling helps to gelatinize the starches in a different way, and this can potentially slow down their conversion to sugar in your bloodstream. Now, if you compare them to many varieties of white potatoes, sweet potatoes can sometimes offer a more favorable nutrient profile and a slightly lower GI. But, and this is a key point, this doesn't give them a free pass. White potatoes, especially those russets, often have a significantly higher GI, and that's something we'll dive into a bit later. So, for those of you who really enjoy sweet potatoes, remember, moderation is absolutely key. It's best to opt for smaller serving sizes. And here's a great tip. Pairing sweet potatoes with foods rich in protein and healthy fats, think a piece of grilled chicken or a slice of avocado, can help slow down the absorption of glucose and lessen that sharp rise in blood sugar. Maybe consider a small boiled sweet potato as a side dish, rather than a large baked one taking over your plate. Number 2, green peas. Green peas are little powerhouses of nutrition, They're frequently praised for their generous content of fiber, protein, and essential vitamins like K and C. Their vibrant color and slightly sweet taste make them a popular addition to various meals, from salads to side dishes. Now, from a glycemic index perspective, green peas typically fall into the moderate category, with an average GI of around 51. So, on the surface, this might not seem overly concerning for managing your blood sugar, especially when you compare them to high GI foods. The potential issue with green peas, however, really lies in their starch content. While they do offer that beneficial fiber, they are also relatively carbohydrate dense when you stack them up against non-starchy vegetables. So, if you're consuming them in large portions, the total amount of carbohydrates from peas can definitely accumulate, leading to a noticeable increase in your blood sugar levels. And this effect can be particularly pronounced if green peas are part of a meal that's already high in other carbohydrates. For instance, adding a large serving of peas to a pasta dish or a meal with rice can significantly boost the overall glycemic load. This could potentially overwhelm your body's ability to manage that influx of glucose efficiently. So, it goes without saying that portion control becomes especially important when you're incorporating green peas into a blood sugar conscious diet. A modest half-cup serving is going to have a very different impact than if you're consuming 1 or 2 cups, especially if those larger portions are a regular habit for you. It's really advisable to think of green peas as part of your meal's carbohydrate allowance, rather than just viewing them as a free vegetable that you can eat without limit. Pairing them with lean protein sources and plenty of non-starchy vegetables, think leafy greens or broccoli, can certainly help to create a more balanced meal and temper that glycemic response. Number 3, parsnips. Parsnips, with their creamy color and shape so reminiscent of carrots, are often sought out as a nutritious root vegetable. You'll sometimes see them used interchangeably with carrots or as a substitute for potatoes. They offer a distinct, slightly sweet and earthy flavor to dishes, which many people enjoy. Now, when we look at their glycemic index, parsnips land in the moderate range, typically with a GI around 52. This is quite comparable to green peas and suggests a moderate rate of glucose release into your bloodstream after you eat them. However, one characteristic of parsnips to be mindful of is their relatively high natural sugar content, especially when you compare them to some other root vegetables. And while these are natural sugars, they still contribute to the overall carbohydrate load of your meal and can definitely influence your blood sugar levels. Just like with other veggies we've talked about, the method of preparation can significantly alter the glycemic effect of parsnips. For example, roasting, which is a really popular way to bring out their sweetness, can concentrate these sugars. This potentially makes them more readily available for digestion, which might lead to a quicker or higher rise in your blood sugar. Mashing parsnips can have a similar effect because it breaks down their structure. So, boiling might be a slightly more favorable cooking method if you're thinking about glycemic impact. So, once again, portion control is a crucial strategy when you're including parsnips in your diet. It's really beneficial to view them as a starchy component of your meal, kind of like how you might treat potatoes or sweet potatoes, rather than thinking of them as a low-carbohydrate vegetable you can eat in large quantities. And here's another smart approach: pairing parsnips with foods that can help stabilize your blood sugar, including a good source of lean protein, perhaps some fish or poultry, and healthy fats, like olive oil or avocados, in the same meal can really help slow down the digestion and absorption of carbohydrates from the parsnips. This leads to a more gradual and gentler blood sugar response. Number 4, russet potatoes. Russet potatoes are an incredibly popular and versatile vegetable, aren't they? They form the base of countless dishes, and many of these are often perceived as healthy. Think of a simple baked potato or some homemade potato wedges. Because they're so widely used, understanding their glycemic impact is particularly important. Despite their common presence in what many consider healthy meal plans, russet potatoes generally have a very high glycemic index. Believe it or not, on average, the GI of a russet potato can be around 111. That's even higher than pure glucose, which has a GI of 100. This means they can cause a really rapid and significant spike in your blood sugar levels shortly after you eat them, especially if you're consuming them in substantial amounts. The reason for this pretty dramatic effect lies in the type and structure of starch found in russet potatoes. You see, this starch is very easily broken down by our digestive enzymes and it's quickly converted into glucose, which then, of course, enters the bloodstream. And, as we've seen with other vegetables, the way russet potatoes are prepared can further worsen their impact on your blood sugar. Mashed potatoes, for example, are often among the worst offenders. The mashing process extensively breaks down the potato cell walls, making that starch exceptionally accessible for digestion. This leads to a very fast release of glucose. Even large baked potatoes, while they might seem simple, can deliver a hefty carbohydrate load that really sends your blood sugar soaring. Then you have fried potatoes, like French fries or potato chips, and these introduce a whole new set of concerns. While it's true that the fat content in fried foods can sometimes slightly delay stomach emptying, and therefore the initial glucose spike, the overall carbohydrate load combined with those unhealthy fats makes them a pretty poor choice for blood sugar control and for your general health. So, for those of you looking to manage your blood sugar, finding alternatives to russet potatoes is often a very good idea. For instance, cauliflower mash can be a surprisingly satisfying substitute for mashed potatoes. If you really want potatoes, some other varieties, like Charisma or Nicola potatoes, might have a somewhat lower GI. But remember, portion control still remains absolutely paramount. If you do decide to eat russet potatoes, it's crucial to keep the portion size extremely small. Pairing them with a generous amount of fiber from non-starchy vegetables, along with lean protein and healthy fats, can really help to lessen that glycemic blow. Leaving the skin on also adds a small amount of fiber, which is marginally beneficial. There's also some evidence suggesting that cooking potatoes and then cooling them, say for a potato salad, can increase their resistant starch content. This might slightly lower their GI, but it's important to note that for individuals who are highly sensitive to carbohydrate intake, this modification might not be enough to prevent a spike. Number 5, rutabaga. Rutabagas, those large round root vegetables with a purplish top and a creamy yellow flesh, are frequently promoted as a healthy, lower-carb alternative to potatoes. You'll often see them featured in low-carbohydrate or ketogenic diet recipes, perhaps used for mashes, fries, or as a bulking agent in stews. Now, while rutabagas are indeed lower in carbohydrates than potatoes like russets, they are not entirely devoid of glycemic impact, and this is where some misconceptions can sometimes creep in. It might surprise you, but for a vegetable often labeled low-carb friendly, cooked rutabaga actually has a glycemic index of around 70. This places it right in the same ballpark as sweet potatoes, indicating it can raise your blood sugar more significantly than many people might expect. So, the context of how rutabaga is prepared and consumed is really crucial here. Boiling or steaming rutabaga is generally going to be preferable to roasting if glycemic impact is a primary concern for you. That's because dry heat methods like roasting can concentrate its natural sugars, potentially leading to a higher glycemic response. The role rutabaga plays within your meal also matters a lot. For instance, if you're incorporating just a small amount of diced rutabaga into a hearty stew that's packed with lean protein, healthy fats, and an abundance of non-starchy vegetables, its contribution to the overall glycemic load of the meal might be relatively small and quite manageable. However, if you're consuming a large serving of mashed rutabaga as the main carbohydrate source on your plate, much like how someone might eat mashed potatoes, then you could certainly experience a notable rise in your blood sugar levels. And this is especially true for individuals who are particularly sensitive to carbohydrates. So, to enjoy rutabaga while effectively managing your blood sugar, practicing portion control is absolutely essential. Don't just assume that because it's often marketed as a potato substitute, you can eat it in unlimited quantities. It's also a very wise practice to monitor your own blood sugar levels after consuming rutabaga just to understand its personal effect on your body. And as always, strategically pairing it with foods that help to blunt glycemic responses, things like protein and fiber, can also be really beneficial. Number 6, carrots. Carrots are universally recognized as a healthy food, aren't they? They're most famous for their high beta-carotene content, which our bodies convert to vitamin A, something that's crucial for good vision. They're also a really popular low-calorie snack, often enjoyed raw for that satisfying crunch and their natural sweetness. When you eat them raw, carrots generally have a low glycemic index, typically around 35. This low GI value means that raw carrots, when eaten in reasonable amounts, are usually a pretty good choice. They're unlikely to cause a rapid spike in blood sugar for most people, and that includes those with diabetes. However, the glycemic story of carrots can change a bit depending on how they're prepared and how much you eat. When carrots are cooked, particularly if they're boiled for extended periods or mashed, their cellular structure starts to break down. This process makes their natural sugars more readily accessible for digestion and absorption, and that can lead to an increase in their effective GI. There's a persistent myth out there that carrots are very high in sugar, and therefore really bad for individuals managing diabetes. While it's true that carrots do contain natural sugars, their overall carbohydrate content in typical serving sizes is actually quite modest. Plus, their glycemic load, especially when they're raw, is generally low. So, that fear of carrots, it's often a bit overstated. The main thing to consider for blood sugar management with carrots really arises when they're consumed in very large quantities. Or, it can be an issue when cooked carrots make up a substantial portion of a meal, especially if they happen to be glazed with additional sugar or honey. You can see how a small handful of raw baby carrots as a snack is quite different from eating several cups of heavily cooked or sweetened carrots, right? So, for the most blood sugar-friendly approach, it's great to enjoy carrots raw, lightly steamed, or perhaps stir-fried to maintain some of their wonderful crispness. If you do decide to cook them, try to avoid overcooking them to the point where they become overly soft. And as with all foods, even the healthy ones, it's always important to be mindful of your portion sizes. This is particularly true if carrots are part of a dish that already contains other sources of carbohydrates. Understanding glycemic index and glycemic load. The glycemic index, or GI as it's often called, is a scale from 0 to 100. It basically ranks carbohydrate-containing foods by how much they raise your blood glucose levels after you've eaten them. Foods with a high GI are digested, absorbed, and metabolized pretty rapidly, and this leads to a sharp and quick rise in your blood sugar. Low GI foods, on the other hand, produce a much slower, more sustained release of glucose into your system. Now, while GI is a really useful tool, something called glycemic load, or GL, provides an even more comprehensive assessment. You see, GL considers both the GI of a food and the actual amount of carbohydrate in a standard serving. It's calculated by multiplying the GI by the grams of carbohydrate in a serving, and then dividing that by 100. So GL gives you a much more practical indication of a food's likely impact on your blood sugar in those real-life eating scenarios. Understanding and making use of both GI and GL can be particularly beneficial if you're managing diabetes or prediabetes. Choosing foods with a lower GI and GL can really help you maintain more stable blood sugar levels. This, in turn, helps in preventing the damaging effects of frequent or extreme glucose spikes and those subsequent crashes, and all of this contributes to better overall metabolic health. General tips for blood sugar-friendly vegetable choices. One of the most fundamental strategies for managing your blood sugar with any food, and that includes vegetables, is definitely portion control. Believe it or not, even the healthiest vegetables can contribute to blood sugar spikes if you consume them in excessively large quantities. This is especially true for those veggies that are more starchy or have a higher natural sugar content. So, it's really important to pay attention to recommended serving sizes. Pairing your vegetables strategically can also make a really big difference. When you're consuming carbohydrate-rich vegetables, try to include good sources of lean protein, healthy fats, and some additional fiber in the same meal. These components are fantastic because they help to slow down the rate of digestion and the absorption of glucose into your bloodstream. And the result? A more gradual and lower rise in your blood sugar. And don't forget, the method of preparation significantly influences a vegetable's glycemic impact. For many starchy vegetables, boiling or steaming tends to be a bit gentler on your blood sugar compared to baking, roasting, or mashing. That's because these latter methods can sometimes concentrate those natural sugars or make the starches more readily digestible. Eating your vegetables raw, perhaps in salads or as crunchy snacks, or even lightly cooked to retain their firmness, often preserves their fiber structure. And this, in turn, can result in a lower glycemic response. Being mindful of the glycemic impact of certain vegetables doesn't mean you need to shun them entirely. Not at all. Instead, it's really all about making informed choices. Understanding that even some of those healthy staples can affect your blood sugar empowers you to moderate portions, choose better preparation methods, and balance your meals much more effectively for improved blood sugar control. If you found this guide useful, we'd be thrilled if you'd consider sharing it with friends or family who might benefit from this information. For more nutrition insights and fantastic tips for healthy living, please do join our newsletter. And of course, we'd also love to hear from you. Go ahead and leave a comment below with your questions or perhaps your own experiences with managing blood sugar and healthy eating. We look forward to it.